I'm happy to put the E up. If you curse, I'll curse. I don't really care. If you don't curse, I won't
preference
curse.
There.
If it slips, whatever, that's totally fine. Don't feel like you have, right. I can't say that. Not a lot of kids are really interested in UX design, I don't think. Maybe there's some, curse to your heart's desire. All right, let's do it.
All right.
What's up, UX fam? How's your mom and them? Welcome to another episode of Beyond UX Design. I'm Jeremy. If you're new here, welcome to the show. I am super stoked to have you. And if you haven't done it already, please consider subscribing to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you are regular here and you feel like you're getting something out of the show, I would really appreciate you leaving a 5-star review. That'll help me out so much more than you can imagine. And as always, thanks so much to Chris, Sarah, Quan, Stacy, Radu, Megan, Andrew, John, Mark, and Kevin for all their support. And if you want to join those fine folks and help keep the show independent and ad-free, you can become a patron for as little as $3 a month. That's less than $1 an episode. And if you do that, you will get some sweet, sweet perks for your support. And of course, if you think the show is worth sharing, then I would love it if you told some friends. So a few weeks back, my good buddy Matthew McPhail mentioned a guy's name to me and said, you really should talk to this guy because he's got a lot of really cool stuff. He just wrote a book. And I think he would be amazing to have on your show. One of the many reasons why I love LinkedIn, by the way. Matthew, thank you so much for introducing me to Anthony. Anthony, I am so excited to have you on today. We're going to talk about his book today, The Art and Science of UX Design, a step-by-step guide to designing amazing user experiences. So Anthony has well over a decade of experience across the entertainment, media, and education sectors. Anthony has created interactive video products for children, educational games for teenagers, and various SaaS platforms for adults. He's created internationally published games, Webby award-winning products, and Emmy-nominated interactive content. He's structured educational experiences around design at all levels, from teaching college courses at the City University of New York to building a boot camp for designers to mentoring emerging design talent on a one-on-one basis. Anthony has collaborated with high-profile organizations including Amazon Music, Vimeo, Discovery, Food Network, Viacom, Nickelodeon on shows like Blue's Clues. I love Blue's Clues, man. It's so awesome. Bubble Guppies and Team Umizoomi, Kaplan, Boston Consulting Group, PricewaterhouseCoopers, and Mattel. That is an extensive list, Anthony. I am so excited to have you on the show today. Anthony Conta, welcome to Beyond UX Design. How's it going?
Yeah, it's great. And thank you for that intro. Wow. It's awesome to be here, Jeremy.
Those are your facts, man.
Yeah, it's true. I also love LinkedIn. And
it's such an amazing place. It's such a cool place because I wouldn't have met Matthew without LinkedIn. Right. I wouldn't have met you without LinkedIn. Matthew, by the way, was on our show a couple weeks back. So check out his episode too. That was a fantastic conversation, but we're here to talk about you. Matthew, you had your spotlight. Now it's Anthony's turn. So Anthony, tell us about you, man. You have obviously done a lot of stuff just based on those facts, all those people that you work with, a lot of really cool stuff. Tell us about you and ultimately, how did you get to writing this book? I'd love to know that.
Sure, yeah. Well, you hit a lot of the highlights, but at a high level, I've been doing design for a while. Yeah, it started, I actually graduated school with a master's in economics, and I went to a law firm, and that just wasn't my vibe. I just didn't, vibe with that sort of trying to pursue legal litigation against other people.
Yeah, that sounds like it's for a certain type.
Yeah, some people like it, and that's fine. It just wasn't for me. So I ended up making my own board game company, which is how I did a lot of those games and the publishing work, and that's really my foray into design. So Kickstarter was really huge at that time. It still is, but it was really becoming emerging at that time. And I ended up making games with my then girlfriend, now wife. Some of them were actually, can be found around my apartment.
That's awesome. Man.
But from there, went to Nickelodeon to work on Blue's Clues and those other shows, did a boot camp. So went to General Assembly to learn more about UX proper. And from there, bounced around a few companies to where I'm at now, Amazon Music, doing some design there.
Wow, what a fascinating story. So you started out with board games as sort of your introduction to design. What's really crazy is I actually interviewed Colton Schweitzer and Ludovic Delmas a few episodes back, and they run a boot camp called Kick-Ass UX. But Colton actually very similar. He actually designed a game, a board game, a card game, and realized this was very similar to UX, and a lot of the principles that we would apply to software design apply here as well. I'm curious, from your perspective, was that your experience?
100%.
You started seeing hey, I'm designing this for a human to actually play a game. I need to talk to them first. And
yeah, 100%. The way that flow worked for me was okay, I'm going to make a thing. I'm making it for someone else. I have to test it. I have to be so deep in the user testing process that I invited people over to my house and like we would do like these deep playtest sessions. And then after the fact, I'd give them like a post survey of like, hey, can you rank the quality of like the things that you experienced? And, very similar to what you'd have for, a usability test or user research. So I noticed like a ton of parallels. And I find that a lot of people who do game design find their way to UX in some capacity.
Oh, I love that, man. That's really cool. So did you turn that into a case study too for your portfolio?
I did. Yeah.
Oh, that's really, do you feel like, I'm curious, this is totally off topic of the book,
Sure.
but I'm curious, this is something that I talk to people a lot. I do a lot of, mentoring and talking to young designers and stuff. And one of the things I say is, find something that you're passionate about to do a case study about that's not just another dog walking app or some random app that you don't really care about. Do you feel like having that, something you cared about, a personal passion project, was something that helped you to sort of not stand out necessarily, but speak in a way that was maybe more convincing or more showed your passion and it came through a little more? It's kind of a very leading question, I guess. But.
Well, the answer is yes. So it did actually help out quite a lot. So when I was getting my first like role as a UX designer or product designer, I showed like the case studies of my work at the company that I started, and which were passion projects at the point. I just translated them into non-passion projects. But by showing that work in my portfolio, the person who hired me really liked my entrepreneurial spirit. Like I was clearly passionate about this thing. I poured a lot of passion into it, and that led to the offer. Like he saw the UX work as well, but by seeing like this thing that I was really passionate about, it really showed like a different level of resiliency and like grit and interest in doing this type of stuff.
All right, so let's talk about the book. How did you get to a point in your career where you said, I want to write a book. I've got enough stuff that I know about. I think other people want to hear it. Tell me a little bit about the book and how the book kind of came to be.
Yeah. So I've been doing a lot of like teaching and mentoring on the side, CUNY, other places, starting at Pratt in a few weeks. So just like a ton of different, mentoring and teaching experiences. And I realized I had all this content. It's like, I have a ton of content. What should I do with this? Should I write Medium articles? Should I, make videos, whatever? I was pretty active on Medium. I still am. And I started writing and I realized I have so much writing. Maybe I should just turn it into a book. I have all these learnings. So I approached a bunch of different publishers with the book and like the idea of the book. And one of them, Pearson, was very interested. And we ended up working together and I wrote the content based on the teaching that I've been doing over the years and the programs that I'd built. And that's kind of how it all came together.
I love the title too, The Art and the Science of UX Design. One of the things I hear from, especially people like on the research side is, this is a science, we're doing science. And then you hear from people on the UI side, the design side, the visual side that talk about it being an art and, creativity is so important, all these other things. And it's funny because you often hear UX versus UI and trying to say one is better than the other, but really the idea is that they go together, they complement each other. You can't, doesn't matter how great the art is. If the science was bad, right, the art isn't going to be useful. So tell me a little bit about this and this idea of art and science and kind of where this evolved from you or how this evolved and became the book and maybe talk a little bit about that art versus science piece.
Yeah. So I'm in love with this idea that this profession is like left brain, right brain. The concept of, like you said, like some of this is like really artsy, some of it's really sciencey. And that's just kind of what we think. Like a lot of people might just think that design is just that art. For a while in my career, when I was working, I would go to an artist and be like, oh, I need like the art, give me the art. But there's like a science to how you apply the principles of visual design in your art, just as there's an art to crafting the questions that you'd seek in the scientific portions of what you do for this process for understanding better users. So I really think it's intertwined. Sometimes like it might lean a little bit more art or lean a little bit more science in certain parts of the process, but every part of the process has at least a little bit of both. And I try to illustrate that in the book and show like, hey, at the start of a chapter, it's like, here's how this is artistic, here's how this is scientific. By approaching it from both these ways, you end up with like a really good, well-rounded process. And that's sort of the philosophy of how the book is structured.
Looking at the book, I see a lot of, really, these are sort of fundamental things. I'm just curious from your perspective. When you wrote this book, did you have a specific person in mind? Who's reading this book? Who's the book for? Everybody listening out there that's hearing this for the first time of this book, who are you speaking to?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of different audiences. Probably one of the primary audiences is people who are design curious. Maybe they haven't come to this field yet, or they just started, or like they really want to learn more about it, or they're like adjacent to it, but they want to know more about how to do, the design thinking process. Like that's probably the core audience, I'd say. Maybe you want to get into a boot camp, or you just graduated a boot camp, or you're in a master's program, whatever, and you want to see some like applied learning for, doing the design thinking process. Secondarily, it could be you've been in the industry for a little while and you want to brush up on a certain part of the process. So the way the book's structured, it goes through the entire design thinking process from learning what the problem is and who you're designing for, all the way through to shipping something. So maybe you want to brush up on research. How do I do a survey? You come to the book, you come to that chapter, you do the exercises there, and you go from there. Like you could take a slice of the book, or you could go end to end. Maybe you don't have any case studies and you want one. The way the book is set up is I actually give you exercises to do at the end of each subchapter, and the exercises combine into a case study that you could put in your portfolio. So I think that type of audience, like maybe a little bit earlier in their careers.
One of the things that I found really fascinating, and I didn't get a chance to read the entire book, but I did get to read the first chapter, I think it was, and looking at the table of contents, there's definitely a lot of stuff here. One of the things that I'm really fascinated with when I talk to a lot of people who have come out of boot camps and even just school, not even boot camps, like a traditional degree, they often have this very specific idea of what they will be doing as a UX designer. And one of the things that I really liked about what the little bit that I read from your book was really practical advice. It seemed very much like tailored towards your real world experience and how to apply these theories. So I'm curious, like, if that was something in your mind as you're going through this, that theory versus reality idea.
Honestly, I was considering calling the book like the theory and practicality of UX rather than like the art and science, like
oh, wow.
when I was studying my, journey into UX design, like I loved hearing the theories. I read all the books and I read all the articles and it was like, here's like some aspirational high level vision setting for how you can think about this career and doing something in the field. But then it always came down to the practical piece. I'd go back to like my work and I'd try to apply what they were talking about. And I'd be like, what am I doing? Like, these are really great, like theories, but I don't know how to actually apply this to the thing that I'm trying to solve. So I wanted to give a lot of that practical advice. And that's part of the reason why I structured it in a way where I ask you like, okay, well now go do it. Like I'll show you a theory. I'll show you an example of that theory. Then I'll say, hey, like here's how I would do it. Then I'll say, here's an exercise, go do it. Then I show you at the back of the book, here's how I would have done it, or I could have done it. So I think that blend of like theory and then the practicality and that coming in with the applied learning is really important.
So I'm curious, like you've done a lot of teaching, you've done a lot of mentoring. What are maybe some horror stories? Like, I don't know, some things I'm curious, like your experience of having, because I mean, I feel like it's one of those things you had enough of this experience to come in and say this book is necessary. So I'm curious, what was there? Like, there's probably like opportunities there that you saw. Let's call them opportunities for learning opportunities, right? Some things that you saw happening maybe in the real world, and you're like, where do these people learn this stuff? What's going on? I'm curious. Do you have any names? Let's leave names out, obviously, names and businesses out. But any experience there? I'm curious. Some things that you came across that kind of said, oh my God, this book, I got to write this
Totally.
book.
I think, so I did a lot of mentoring through like ADP List and Design Lab and a couple other places. And, the top two questions are probably look at my portfolio. How do I get a job? Those are like the top two questions that I've experienced. But like these other common questions keep coming up. And by structuring this book, it's kind of like what I would do on the side. I'd have like a notepad file of like, all right, you're asking this question. Let me go look. I'm going to read and find the specific question that's there. And then that kept happening. So like that repository was really helpful towards thinking about how I wanted to structure the book as well.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned ADP List. I'm no longer mentoring ADP List, but I was on ADP List for about a year or so. And I did like insane amount of sessions. I did 100-something sessions, which is, not to say that was impressive by any means, but the point is I did a lot. I got a lot of questions from people. And 80% of the time, they were the same. They were the same exact questions, just like you said. And it's funny, you said, I need to write this book. I started the podcast specifically for that reason, because I was getting so many of the same questions over and over again. I said, people clearly are not hearing these things in school or wherever. Maybe school's not the right place for them to hear some of the stuff about soft skills, but I don't know, maybe you could make the argument like there should be some things there about like, practical advice, like how to get a job, how to do this stuff, how to work with a team, how to work with an engineer, how to work in agile, that kind of thing. It's just crazy to me. Like some of these boot camps, you can't call every one of them out because they're not all the same, and it all depends on the instructor that you get, I mean, you could go to the best boot camp in the world, best school in the world, get a crappy instructor, you're not going to learn anything. You could go to the worst one and get a great instructor, you might learn some stuff. So It's hard to generalize there. It's funny, you're like, I need to write a book. I was like, I need to start a podcast. It worked together. Look at that. Now we're hanging out talking about this stuff.
Hey, we combined.
There you go. Nothing wrong with that. So I'm curious in the real world stuff. I want to explore this a little bit too, because this is kind of something I feel like we can't speak about enough. In the real world, in your experience, what were some things that you've seen? Maybe new designers, or maybe not even new designers, maybe even veteran designers that were just like, "How are you doing this? What is going on here? Where'd you learn this? Or why do you think this is appropriate to do?" That sort of pragmatism versus the rigidity.
Yeah, I've experienced some hesitancy and some confusion around like research. I think research is like a great area of opportunity for a lot of designers. I know that at some organizations I've been at, like they don't necessarily feel as comfortable, or like they get really anxious about like going on to a moderated user interview and trying to ask questions about their designs, maybe even getting a little defensive at times. So I think there's like a lot of room to grow in there, and I've seen that through designers as they're like entering the field and industry. That's probably like one of the more common ones, which is another reason why that was so important in the book, like having like not just like best practices and guidelines, but like the permission to fail a little bit, like within the text that I've written there. So I think that's like probably like a really big area of growth opportunity if you're just starting out.
I talk to a lot of people who have run boot camps or instructors at boot camps. I haven't really had a chance to speak to a lot of people who do like
Sure.
university courses. And when you were working at the how do you say it? Is it City? I always said City University, but is it CUNY? Is that how you pronounce it? Is that how people in New York say it?
It's like a cue ball almost, and it is the City University of New York. Yeah.
Okay. I wasn't sure. I mean, that's a mouthful
Right.
though. So CUNY makes sense to people. So that, and you're teaching at Pratt soon. That's awesome. I'm curious, are these are these classes as part of a more traditional bachelor's degree, or are these extensions of those schools that have like a shorter 6-month?
Yes. So for CUNY, it was like a certificate program. Like, hey, like here's a digital course that teaches you about UX. For Pratt, it is their master's program. So their product design course. Yeah.
Okay. I looked at doing that some time ago, and I'll be honest, the cost was like prohibitively expensive. It was outrageous. I don't know, 100,000 or so. I don't know, maybe not 150,000 or something for
education's expensive.
More than I can afford. But I did look into it. It's not cheap, I know. But that's hey, some people out there, you want to take it. I'm definitely not telling anybody not to take it. But and if you're the instructor there, then by all means go check it out. So talk to me a little bit about this. I'm curious, teaching at a certificate level versus teaching at a master's level. How is that different from your perspective? What kind of things do you do in one versus the other, or how do you approach teaching someone at a master's level versus obviously a boot camp, somebody who's never done any of it before, versus masters where they have some experience there? What's your approach there? How does that work?
We're going to find out. This is the first. This is the first time I'm teaching at the master's level for in person as well. So it's going to be very different. I think part of it is like the time horizon. So for CUNY, maybe you had like a month or two for the certificate. This is like a full on semester. So that's different. Being in person will have a lot of different energy. Some of my teaching was done virtually, which has like a different sort of vibe to it with like gathering, for example, and like the camaraderie that comes from being in person. I think there is also a level of level setting that needs to happen, or at least like, what's the right word for this? Maybe modularity, because for the certificate program, none of these people knew design. They weren't necessarily even studying design. Like you're coming to it and you're like, oh, like what is this UX thing? Like for the people at Pratt, like they're taking a master's in this. They're pretty familiar with, at least with the concept of what like UX is, and they're like trying to become digital product designers, or at least somewhat aware of this stuff. So it's going to be a little less of like that introductory stuff, probably, and a little more into the weeds earlier on in the program.
That's fascinating. This is something totally off topic of the book,
Sure.
But I find this fascinating. And do you mind if we go off topic a little bit?
Oh, let's do it. Yeah.
I'm curious from your perspective, and again, I know that this is your first time doing it, so if you don't know, I don't want to put you on the spot. But who would you think would be a great fit for a master's level design program versus someone who might just go read a book, learn some things on their own? Is there advice you might give a mentor who's saying, I'm considering this? What do you think? Is it worth the money? Should I say, in my case, let's pretend like it's me. I got wife, 2 kids. I got a job. I make a decent amount of money. I'm actually thinking about a master's program to advance my studies. And I always feel like it's one of those things you can never learn too much. I feel like, right? Obviously there's a cost benefit analysis there, but I'm curious, if you were talking to somebody like me, what advice would you give to talk about advanced degrees in design?
Yeah, well, you got a podcast in design, so I don't know if you need one.
Oh yeah, maybe.
But like if we're talking, if we take that piece away and like your years of experience in the industry, and you're just like, hey, should I do? I think it's all about context. what are your constraints? So the way that I approach this, because I actually thought about taking the Pratt program as well a couple of years back after my boot camp. And for me, it was about resources and like, is this worth the investment? So like, it's a 2-year thing. It's like you said, 50,000, 100,000, whatever the number is, some thousands of dollars in the 5 to 6 figure range. And do you need it or not? The cool thing about design is as a field, you don't necessarily need a degree in what you're doing. Like my degree is in economics. Like that is not a design degree, right? Like that's not something that I necessarily use every day. But like, would you need a degree? Do you have a degree already? Maybe you don't need like another degree, or can you get it in a faster way? Like I went to a boot camp instead of getting a master's degree because I wanted to accelerate my learning. I wanted it to now come in 6 months, not 2 years. So that's like kind of why I did what I did. And I knew that like learning in person was really important to me. So that's why I made the choice that I did to go to my boot camp. I wanted to have like people like-minded that were around me and learning from them with like the career placement and everything else. So I think it kind of just depends on like what you're working with and what your goals are, which is why it's so hard to say like in the abstract. Like a wife and 2 kids, do you have 2 years and all that money discretionarily to like spend on a master's degree? Probably not.
Probably not. Yeah. The big question too for me was always like, am I going to make more money than I would make without it? And would I be able to pay these student loans off in a reasonable amount of time?
Yep.
Or am I going to have to pass the debt on to my kids? Or I don't even know how that works. I don't even want to think about how that works. But yeah, so that's kind of interesting because I've always been really curious about that. Like I've seen a lot of people recently that have, doctorates in design and stuff. And I'm just like, that's a lot of time and money spent. What are you going to do with that degree? I mean, it's fascinating, write books, write articles and stuff, obviously like scholarly articles and academic papers and things like that. And influence the industry in that way. But yeah, I've always been fascinated by that. And the fact that it's like in person, I've always loved in-person school, to be honest. I mean, that's something too, like with school in general, and this is something, I'm not saying boot camps can't offer this, but I think one of the things that an in-person degree offers often is the network that comes along with the school, right? I mean, certain schools, you introduce to certain people. I would imagine a place like Pratt, you're coming out of Pratt and it's not just the stuff you learned, it's all the people that you met who also went to Pratt, the people who teach at Pratt, the people who know people that at Pratt, the people that the Pratt people know, in the industry and can connect you. And maybe that in itself might even be worth sometimes the investment. And, the in-person stuff, especially building relationships and stuff that way, I think so. Just so valuable.
I think so. That's kind of why I went to GA, General Assembly, because I wanted that same experience. Like learning in person with others is just so good. It's like so much fun, and it keeps you so engaged with what you're trying to understand. And there's a lot of value like in the alumni network as well. Same for Brett.
Some of the things that I'm really curious about this book, again, is the practical nature of it, the real world scenarios and things like that. And you came from General Assembly boot camp, one of the bigger ones. What was your personal experience like when you got into the real world and some of these things you were taught in the boot camp versus some of the real world scenarios? I'm curious to hear some of your personal experiences with having to struggle through this. And obviously, I think, again, this is why you decided to write the book, because you saw that kind of delta between reality and theory. What were some things for you that you learned that you kind of took away for maybe others out there to kind of keep an eye out on?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things was that in my program, we were taught this process, and you're supposed to go like end to end through this process, and you always have to do all these steps in the process. I think that was hammered a little too hard into the curriculum. It's more like, hey, here's all these things you could do. Here's all these tools that you could have, these processes that are available to you, and then you have to apply them as needed. I think of this profession as like, a handyman or a carpenter or something, where you are given a bunch of tools in like your tool belt or your toolkit. And then you go to someone's house or you go to a project and you're like, oh, I need a hammer. Oh, I need like a saw. That's what this job requires. But in my education, it was like, oh, you got to do all these things all the time. Personally and professionally, like I don't really make personas very often, it's not like, I don't go to like a whiteboard and affinity map stuff all the time, but in school, that's like one of the biggest parts sometimes. So I think like the school is set up to teach you all these processes, but it's up to you post-graduation to figure out when you need to use these processes.
And I feel like that's something that we miss quite a bit with regards to boot camps, is it is 6 months. And we often, I hear, and not every boot camp does this, but job ready in 6 months. And you give this sort of, you infer at least that you're going to know everything you could possibly know to get a job in 6 months. And your point with the personas, like this is something I feel like maybe I've never taken a boot camp, so I don't know if this is taught. I'm sure some instructors specify this, so I can't say everybody does. But I was talking with somebody recently about, I had 4 user interviews. So I created these personas, and they created 3 personas. That you just basically like rehashed what one person said. That's not a persona. So like the idea there is like, I think people just assume they have to create these personas, but there's a reason, just like you said, there's a tool I have to attach 2 pieces of wood together, and I might need to take them apart at some point. I'm going to use a hammer and nail, right?
Yeah.
I might need really solid, I need to use a screw. I want that thing to not come out, or I might need to use wood glue and a screw or something, you know what I mean? Or a pocket jig or whatever, And it's like these tools are available to us, but there's a reason why we need them. In the case of personas, I need a persona because I might have a team of 100 people who didn't get to go on all these interviews, and I want to synthesize all that information down to something very specific so I can share it.
Exactly.
And so I can share it. It's not for me to use. It's for, maybe it's from a future me to go back and reference, but it's not for just to shove in a box folder or a share drive and never read again. It's to explain what's going on to people who weren't there, to share with my team and the engineers and the product managers and all that stuff, right? And often that is missed. I feel like it's like create a persona, but not often why we need one to begin with, And I see so many boot camp case studies that are just like, I did this, came to persona, and then they never mention the persona again, And so it's just like, why? What'd you do that for? Why'd you do it? And often it's coming from a few interviews anyway, so it's completely meaningless. And yeah, that idea of the tool is just something I feel like a lot of people totally miss. We got a toolbox. I might not need that hammer. I might not need that screwdriver, but I need this other thing. So I love that you call that out.
Yeah. And I see that, like you said, like that linearity of case studies, that happens a lot where it's like, oh, I did a deliverable, here it is. And like you expect the deliverable to speak for itself. But like you said, like it's that why, like why did you make that deliverable? You need to tell the story of like how that deliverable matters for like your project. So I see that one a lot too. When you get someone graduating from a program or a boot camp, it's like, okay, here's the hit list of like all the things I did. I'm done now. And it's like, no, bring that together into the story and narrative of like why you did it. That's a huge one that I see as well.
And I assume you go into that part in the book.
Yeah. So there's like a chapter at the end that talks about like, getting a job, like how do you work with like developers or other people? How do you write a case study? How do you like tell the story of that type of stuff?
One of the things that I was talking with somebody recently about something like this, and one of the things that I've seen, and maybe this isn't theory so much, but it's the rigidity around the theory that they learn. It's we have to do it this way. Why would you never do it this way? You crazy? We can't write software this way. We can't build software. Yeah. We can't release software if we don't do these 80 things in order, And so one of the things that I've seen with a lot of people coming from school in general, and I don't want to just say boot camps because I think this is just school. People learn that process. They learn that theory. They learn that order of steps. And when they get to a team and that team does things out of order or skips things completely, they're just like, whoa, hold on, wait, we can't do it. Like, what do you mean? You're crazy. Like, and so I've seen a lot of UX designers, and this is not really junior either. I've seen a lot of senior designers doing things like this, but just being so rigid and not pragmatic, not realizing like, hey, I got to be pragmatic. Like picking my battles, for instance, understanding what I can win and what I can't win, and knowing when to fight and knowing when to just be like, all right, I tried. There's nothing I can do here. Well, we'll see what happens, I don't know. I'm curious. Have you run into something like that? Has that been something that you?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and that rigidity, it speaks a little bit to the science of our profession. Like here's the theory, here's the way, the exercise that you do this. But the art comes in, and the way in which you apply these tools and techniques, and that's like the dance of like the art and science of this profession. It's. We have to do things this way, but you need to know when to break the rules as well. That's design. We have a set of rules and principles that we're given. But knowing when to break those rules is a part of the profession and doing the dance of doing design.
I love that. Well, you just said something too, the dance, that I just want to holler. I want to call out for a minute. And the interesting thing with the dance is it requires a partner.
Yeah.
Right. It requires someone on the other side, right? Or a line dance. I guess you got everybody doing it. I've always found line dances to be off-putting. They'll just say that. But let's say you're a regular dance, 2 people dancing. It requires a partner, and it requires someone to lead. Right. And you have to know what your partner's capable of doing, right? You can't just go in and start trying to do the salsa if your partner can't do it, or if you're trying to do the salsa, someone else is trying to do the Macarena or something, right? Like that dance is going to be totally off. And I love that idea of I've never really thought about that idea of a dance, but you have to know what your partner's limitations are.
Right.
Right. And you have to know what they are capable of, and you have to know where they want to go or where they don't want to go. And it does require that kind of like dance, and you can work together and coach them and teach them to eventually get to the salsa, but you can't go in on day one and expect that other person to do the salsa if they've never done the salsa before.
Totally.
And, I don't know. I love that. I want to explore that a little bit more maybe at some point, that idea of a dance.
Yeah. And I would say like, when you think about it, like as a dance, like you think of like the term agile, right? That's like what you have to do when you like dancing, right? Like the line dancing is maybe more waterfall.
Yeah. Very off-putting. Yep.
Right. Yeah. So I think there is this like level of like meeting someone else, and like this profession's also like a partnership, and you partner with other, professions within that, like product or engineering or whatever. And it's like a team sport as well, I would say.
Now, when you teach this stuff at school, master's level, maybe this is something different, but boot camps at least, when you've done the courses, the certificates, do you talk a lot about that sort of working with engineers, product managers, this sort of idea of a dance?
Definitely.
How do you do that in a short amount of time? I'm just curious, like, what is the method there for teaching people in a short amount of time how to work with these people? Because it seems like it's sort of one of those things you almost can't really grasp until you do.
Yeah.
But there's obviously, that doesn't mean you can't teach it. But I'm just curious, is there a way that you found that works for that?
Yeah, I think it becomes a little bit more theoretical necessarily than practical. We talked a lot about how the book has theory and practice, but I think you can't necessarily map out every single person and how they interact. So it's much more about like heuristics or guidelines of like, hey, you're going to partner with a leader, for example, like you're going to like work with stakeholders. Here's how you do that. Present your work as a detective, and present it as like a lawyer, and present it as like a consultant. And like, if you maintain these mentalities, what does a lawyer do? They find evidence and make their case. What does a consultant do? They make their case and make a recommendation, but allow the business to decide. Like by applying these certain like heuristics or principles to these conversations, you end up getting sort of like a mini roadmap or guidelines for how to navigate these conversations.
Yeah. Oh, I love that idea of like using heuristics to understand and navigate these relationships, because you can't always be specific, right? Like I could almost see like a whole like book around the heuristics of dealing with people. Maybe that's like your next book. I don't know.
Maybe.
I probably won't write that book, but that idea of like dealing with people. And that's something too, I feel like people coming from school, that art and science, the science saying we do this the same every way. The art is like, well, sometimes we do, but let's try this thing and sort of not manipulate, that's a negative connotation, but mold the relationship to be where we want it to be. Yeah, influence, that's a better word.
Yeah.
To influence that thing so that we can get more of the work that we want to do, the science piece. We have to use some of that art in, people at work, I work with the art of the possible all the time. That's something like we throw around at work, but figuring out like what the art of the possible is, because sometimes we got a lot of constraints. Let's figure out what we can do given the constraints that we have. We can't always apply that rigid, rigorous science every single time. And sometimes it's overkill. Sometimes it's not necessary. If we want to decide to put the button on the left or the right, do we need to do like, hours and hours of user research to figure out if the button should be on the left or the right? One of the things I ask,
got to do your 80 steps.
Got to do it. One of the things I always ask is to understand is like, what if we're wrong? What's the outcome? What's the impact if we're wrong? Are thousands of people going to be left, without power if this software breaks? Or are we just going to have people slightly confused for 30 seconds and they can still proceed? And that's something I think is really important too, is like questioning what happens if we're wrong. Because sometimes the impact of that decision is not nearly as important as some other decision.
Yeah.
And I've found a lot of times designers will go down that rabbit hole and get laser focused on that one thing.
At Amazon, we have this concept called like one-way doors and two-way doors. Like the concept of like, is this
like in a
decision
restaurant?
Exactly right? Yeah. Is this decision reversible or not? Can we go back to like the state that we were in before if we make this choice? Maybe you have a product launch and that's a one-way door. Like we released this, we had all the fanfare, but maybe it's like, oh, we're changing the button. We can just put it back on the other side if we need to. I'm
curious. A big company like Amazon, a lot of people might think, oh, they've got their processes in place, they've got rigor around everything. And I'm curious. I don't want you to give away like how the sausage is made or get in trouble or anything. But I'm curious. Would people be surprised at how much fluidity there is in the process at a place like Amazon? Or would they maybe is it what they expect, where everything is very clear and everyone knows what they're doing? I don't want to get you in trouble.
Yeah, I don't think I'll get in trouble. I hope not. But like the way that I view it is at Amazon, just like any other big tech company, like we have our own processes and procedures and cultures. And Amazon's like a pretty big writing culture, for example. So we do have a lot of like good documentation and process and ways to make the things that we do. I think everywhere has their own like quirks and idiosyncrasies. But Amazon has a pretty, regimented, well-documented process of how we build things.
How long have you been at Amazon? You've been there for a while?
We're a year now. Yeah.
Wow, that's awesome, man. Cool. You live in Seattle, right? I guess.
I live in New York, actually.
You live in New York. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, you're on East Coast time. That's right. Okay. For some reason, I was thinking you're Pacific. Okay.
That's all good.
That's awesome, man. Yeah. What is it like working at a place like Amazon? I don't know if you can talk about that, but is it as stressful as a lot of people say it is, where it's just like very grueling, very, very intense? It's very, do you feel that way?
Yeah. I would say that I've been in a couple places now doing this, and Amazon feels similar to those other places with respect to like the cadence of work. You have some weeks that are a little bit lighter. You have some weeks that are a little bit heavier. It depends on the project you're in. It could be a really strong, amount of time of like trying to figure out what you're trying to solve, and design leans in really heavily, making mocks and iterating and whatnot. It could be like heavy research days. But sometimes it's, you are working with your developers to implement something. You check a few bugs, you make sure those work. So it ebbs and flows. And I've seen that happen at Amazon, at Vimeo, at Food Network, at Kaplan, all over the place, really.
Food Network. I would love to work at Food Network. Did you get a chance to like hang out with any of the celebrities or any of the
I did.
The talent, I guess they say?
Yeah. So I hung out with Guy Fieri. He was doing he was doing a promo event. He was really fun. He took me to Flavortown. It was delicious. I had a great time. Man. Yeah.
Memories. Did you stamp your passport? Did you get a passport stamp?
Yeah, exactly. I got some swag from him. It was fun. He was doing promos for Chicken Guy, which was like his restaurant. And he made probably the best chicken fingers I've ever had. So it was really good.
Hell yeah, that's awesome, man. Yeah, is Guy Fieri like as down to earth as he would seem?
So down to earth
in real life. He seems like he'd be. I don't know. I look at him and I'm just like, he seems like a cool dude. Like he seems legit. Yeah. He seems like he's very personable. Really I know chill. I had some friends who were in the restaurant industry and got a chance to meet some of the I don't want to name names, but some of the talent, some of the people from Food Network, and they were like, He was a total hag. He wouldn't even look at us. He wouldn't tell. He was like, anyway.
He was like literally feeding us. Like he was like making the food in front of us, and he's like, "Hey, here you go." It was really nice. Yeah.
That's awesome. I love that, man. Yeah, food. I actually almost went to culinary school. So funny you mentioned you went to economics. So I a little bit about me. I actually was this close to going to culinary school, and Louisiana at the time, this was 23 years ago, had the only public culinary school in the country.
Oh wow!
So Chef John Foles, he's big down in Louisiana in the South, but he had a culinary school out of Nichols State University, which is in Thibodaux, Louisiana, little Cajun area. I think he was actually from around that area. He's Cajun too. Anyway, I was that close to going, but then none of my friends went there. They all went to LSU. So I was like, well, I want to go where my friends went. So I went to LSU and I was like, well, what the hell am I going to do now? I wanted to be a chef. I go to LSU and it was like, oh, business school, and I'm like, oh, business. What the hell am I going to do with business degree?
Exactly.
Well, my grades were awful because I was in a band and stuff, and I was staying out all night drinking beer and playing music. So my grades were awful. So I couldn't get into the business school. But what I could get into was we had an arts and science economics program, which was part of the arts and science school. There was another economics program as part of the business school. So this was arts and science. So it was economics courses, but also, like language and arts and stuff.
I see.
That.
Okay.
So anyway, I did that for a long time, and I got like 15 hours to graduating. I really loved economics. I loved the philosophy of it, right? The macroeconomics, how people behave and all that stuff. Rational humans, quote unquote rational humans, reacting quote unquote rationally. And I love that part of it. But what I couldn't do was the microeconomics when they had us calculate all the curves. I could look at the curves and read the curves, and it was fascinating. But when you asked me to take the calculus and the numbers and calculate the curves, I was like, I can't do this. There is no way. I actually took business calculus, which is like calculus for dummies, basically. I took that 3 times. I couldn't pass it.
Oh, wow.
And finally I said, you know what? If I learned one thing from all these 4 or 5 years of school, it was the sunk cost fallacy. And I don't want to do anything with this degree. I'm done. I'm never going to use it. I would have been like an insurance salesman or something. I don't know what I would have done with an economics degree. So I dropped out, and I never actually finished with an economics degree, but I got like this close. All I needed was like a couple of calculus classes. So I loved economics though. To me, it was like a precursor to sort of UX in that like it's how people behave and react to certain situations. And I do see a lot of similarities.
Yeah, no, I was going to say like, that's kind of what drew me to economics as well, like the behavior and like why people do the things that they do. And I loved that part of it. And it makes no surprise to me that a bunch of economists also find UX design because it's like the curves aren't as much fun.
Yeah. Exactly.
I actually like had a job where I had to like make the curves. Like yeah, I know. That was part of the stuff I had to do at the law firm and the consulting firm I joined after. It was so much more fun thinking about like game theory and like sunk costs and like marginal utility and like how people approach things. That was so much more interesting to me that I should have probably like done psychology instead of like math.
That's what I started to look at. I was like, well, maybe I would have made a lot more money.
Yeah, what do I do?
But yeah, that's so fascinating. It's funny because you are not the first economics person that I've met that's gotten into UX design. And every time I hear another person that was in economics, I hear architecture and economists, maybe more than like any two fields that transition into UX design.
Yeah.
But that's fascinating. All right. So before we get out of here, Anthony, one last time, anything else that you feel like people should know that you think they're going to get out of this book? Maybe spend a little bit of time just talking about that.
Yeah. So just going back to the book structure, if you're looking to like break into design or like you just got here and you want to like really learn a lot more about like end-to-end design stuff, I think this book's for you. It gives you the theory of like why we do UX UI and all the different parts of the process. And it takes you through design thinking end to end, leveraging Nielsen Norman's framework of, you empathize, then you define, then you iterate, then you prototype, you test and implement your solution. And within that, you'll get exercises that you get to do that lead to you getting a case study if you wanted and like guidance on the portfolio at the end. So if that sounds interesting to you, it's almost like a little boot camp in a box, like you get to do that from that perspective. I'd recommend it, but I'm a little biased.
Boot camp in a box. I love that. It's like a boot camp in a box. So, what I get out of this, and this is, I'm going to tell me if I'm wrong, but reading through this book, this is an excellent primer for the things that you would know needing to go into work. Obviously, reading about it and doing them are two very different things. I love that you have examples and exercises. So you could actually follow along here. And just like you said, boot camp in a box, I love that. I know there are people out there that are very much, self-motivated, driven to do this on their own. And I think this is a really great way for them to, at the very least, read this book and decide if you want to do more courses, more coursework, boot camp, or full on degree. I feel like this is an amazing list of resources here in this book. So I want to shout that out, give that a highlight because I think that's awesome.
Thank you. Yeah.
All right. So before we do that, we got some questions I want to ask. But before we do, tell us about where we can get the book. If I'm not mistaken, you've got a little promo code. So anybody listening out there can actually use that promo code, get a little discount on the book. Go ahead and let us know, where can we find The Art and Science of UX?
Yeah, it's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Walmart, like all the like traditional sellers that you think you find books. It is also available from the publisher. So Pearson, their publication Peach Pit. If you go there, you can get, I think it's 25 to 35% off. I forget the exact number. On the ebook, you can get off if you use my last name, Conta. There's a lot of places you can find it.
What's the URL for that? Peachpit.com?
Peachpit.com, yeah.
Okay. And we just search for the book and we use the promo code Conta, Conta.
That's right.
Checkout to get, how much was that discount again?
I think it's, I don't want to say more than I think it is, but it's either
amount of money
somewhere. It is somewhere between 20 to 35%. Sorry if it's not 35.
Right. No, that's fine.
It's a good discount.
All right, awesome. And we will include all of those links in the show notes, so don't worry, you can find them there. Anthony, where can people find you as well? Tell us a little bit about you. Where can we find you? Want to follow you, read some of your Medium articles, all that stuff. Tell us about that.
Most active on LinkedIn, followed by Medium, followed by Twitter would be like the top 3 places.
Right on. Awesome. And we will include links it's X now. It's not Twitter. You guys. That's so funny. That's a whole nother episode on its own. That just drives me crazy. I'm
gonna call it Twitter for now. I know it's rebranded,
you know what?
but
Can I be honest? I wouldn't be surprised if he changes it back to Twitter at some point in the future.
We're gonna see what happens after the cage match,
The cage match. What a bunch of knuckleheads. I wish I had that much freaking money to just be that big of a jackass.
This is a bit of a tangent, but there actually has been precedent for, millionaires or billionaires like competing in cage matches before. I think there's like an arm wrestling thing that happened for airlines, like 2 different airlines fought with like an arm wrestle for a slogan. Yeah, I think it was like
No
Southwest
way.
and another one. Yeah.
Who won? Do you know?
I think Southwest won. I don't really
Oh,
remember. I
wow.
just saw like the arm wrestle like fight.
That is so funny. Oh my God. That's
It's
hilarious.
crazy.
Not surprising at all. Not surprising at all.
Yeah.
But that is hilarious. Well, I got a few questions that I like to ask all my guests to help everybody listen out there get to know our guests a little bit better. 5 really quick questions. Not too tough. Just whatever comes to the top of your head, and we'll go from there. Are you ready?
I am.
All right. First up, what is your favorite non-design book?
Atomic Habits by James Clear. It was incredible.
Atomic Habits. I love that. Yeah, that's you're not the first person to mention that. I think there's a lot of people. What tell me about that book. What do you like about that book?
I think it was best book of 2021 or 2022. It was really good just like thinking about your habits from like, like in the same way that we have atomic design of like atoms and molecules and whatever else.
Little tiny micro
the same
habits.
type of thing, like so micro habits. So I started learning guitar over the pandemic. And in order to like reinforce my guitar learning, I put it next to me because it's in sight of view and everything. So that's like one of the principles of the book. Like if it's in sight, you'll do it more. So like the things you don't want to do, you should like put them to the back of the fridge, for example, or like put them in your closet or whatever, that type of stuff.
So the reason why I never work out is because my bench is in the basement. So that's
put your running shoes right next to your desk or at the front of the door. And that's like one of the examples he gives. Yeah.
I love it. That's awesome. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I love that. All right. What is your favorite non-design podcast?
Yeah. I like lore a lot. It's
Lore,
like,
okay.
It talks about, different sort of lore essentially of various like horror stories. So they turned it into like a show. I think it's on Prime
cool.
Video. But it's like you'll explore like the concept behind a lore, like maybe like the Chupacabra or like, the Slender Man or whatever. So it's a fun little like horror story thing.
I love that stuff. I actually was following, there's I think it's like Parcast is the network, a bunch of podcasts they put out. And they moved to Spotify only exclusively, which drives me crazy because we have like this, I don't have like the family account. So like anytime my kids like tell the smart speaker to play music, it like takes over my account. And it stops whatever I'm playing. So I hate listening to podcasts on Spotify. So I don't, but anyway, they had, Parcast had a, Unexplained Mysteries, series that I think they just finished in like horror stories and things like that, which they would do something similar, but I'm going to check out lore because I can't listen to podcasts because I'm stupid Spotify. My kids make it impossible. So I'm going to put that on my list. Lore. What's your favorite meal? And this could be a meal you cook, something you bought somewhere, something your grandma used to make, some meal you used to have on vacation, whatever. It doesn't matter. Favorite meal?
It really got to depend on the mood. But if we're talking in the abstract, I think ramen. I love ramen. Ramen's like a really big ramen scene in New York, for example.
Oh,
so
I bet. Yeah.
One of the favorites I ever had was lemon pepper ramen. It was incredible.
Lemon pepper ramen.
Yeah, it was like giant wedges of like lemon in the ramen, and it was just like so good.
Wow, yeah. We don't get a lot. I'm in Cincinnati. We don't get a lot of ramen. I don't think there's a lot of ramen. We'll probably get it in 10 years. Cincinnati's always like the last to get stuff like that. But what's your favorite ramen place in New York? You have a favorite?
Yeah, I did have a favorite, but they closed. They were called Bossa Nova.
Oh.
So if we're not counting that one, EAK is EAK Ramen is in Chelsea. So that's a pretty good one.
Right on. All right. Well, if you're in New York, check it out. What is your favorite vacation spot?
Italy, hands down.
Italy.
Loved it.
I love it.
Went there a year ago. All of it, really.
All of it. Oh,
Just
nice. You get to
we
travel.
did we did like a north to south thing. I think Amalfi Coast is probably one of my favorites.
Amalfi. My sister went there for her honeymoon. And I've never been, but I hear it's amazing. We have family in Sicily. Not Miller, by the way. My mom is a Di Vincenti. So we've got a lot of family there, a lot of cousins and stuff. I actually have a cousin who's a priest at a church there. And we have my family got to go down to Sicily, up, I don't know, whatever you want to say. Anyway, over to Sicily and got to hang out with all the cousins and stuff. And
that's
they're
awesome.
all friends on like Facebook and stuff now. And my mom's always like, she's always writing stuff in Italian. I can't understand what they're saying. I'm like, well, they are in Italy, Mom.
That is how they speak.
Not everybody speaks English. I know Americans don't like that. All right. I love it. What's your favorite design tool that is not Figma?
Yeah. Whimsical. I like Whimsical a lot. Yeah. So that's it's kind of like Miro, a little bit, but they have a really nice like wireframing kit, sort of like mid-fidelity wireframing. Nice. They're just like very nice flow charts. I think they're just like a really well put together tool and really like intuitive and easy to use.
I don't think I've heard of Whimsical. I don't think I've heard of that one before. I wrote that down. I'm gonna check it out. why I like asking people all these things. It gives me ideas for all this stuff.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
cool. All right, Anthony. Well, that's everything I got for you for today. Before we get out of here, one more time, tell us where we can get the book. Remind us of that promo code again and where we can find you before we get out of here.
Absolutely. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Walmart, any of the major retailers will have it. Peach Pit will have the book with the discount code. So if you order the ebook from peachpit.com, you will get 20 to 35% off. Got to use my last name, Conta.
And have you been to Barnes & Noble yet to get the physical copy of the book?
You know, it comes out in like
you haven't? It hasn't come out yet. Okay.
So it hasn't come out yet, but I don't know if it's going to be in stores, but I really want to look because
man.
My games were actually in Barnes & Noble like a couple years ago. Yeah, so I got to
That's
walk in and see the games and I was like, oh my God. It's an incredible feeling.
This is how nerdy I am. If this were me, my first book, I would go to every single Barnes & Noble.
Yep.
And I would stand there and I'd be like, that's my book. That's mine. I wrote that book. And I would take pictures. Like, anybody want an autograph? Free signing right now. Anyway, I would do that. I would. My wife and I actually, this is 10, 15 years ago. We had a full page article in How Design magazine about a little side hustle. We were designing like New Orleans t-shirts and stuff.
Okay.
And we had a full page article in How. And we went to Barnes & Noble and got the magazine. We took pictures of Barnes & Noble.
Yep.
It was super nerdy. But that was only a single page. I can imagine a whole book. What I would do.
We did the same thing, my wife and I. We went in, we recorded it. We bought a copy. We have the receipt of the copy we bought somewhere. Yeah, exactly.
I love it. That's awesome, man. All right, Anthony. Well, this was fantastic. I love talking to you today. For everybody out there, make sure you check out Anthony's book. If you're thinking about getting into UX design, you haven't done a course, you're self-taught, I feel like this book especially is going to be super helpful. Even if you've done a boot camp, these exercises in the book will be amazing to just, test out, just to try. Like, the advice about, creating case studies and portfolios on its own, I think is even just invaluable. So anyway, check this book out. Anthony, thank you so much for hanging out today. It was a blast talking to you. I really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. Thanks for having me. I had an awesome time chatting with you.
Well, all right, y'all. That's it for Anthony and me for today. I hope we helped to give you a pretty good idea what you can learn if you pick up Anthony's book, The Art and Science of UX Design, a step-by-step guide to designing amazing user experiences. Remember to pick that up wherever you pick up real, live, paper books. You can also get the book for a pretty sweet discount at peachpit.com. Use the code CONTA, that's CONTA, Anthony's last name, to get 35% off at checkout. If you like what you heard today, don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. If you feel like you're getting something out of the show, I would love it if you left a 5-star review. That would help way more than you know. And if you know somebody who might find any of this stuff useful, why don't you tell them about it? That would be fantastic. If you want to help keep the show independent and ad-free, check out all those Patreon sponsorship packages at beyonduxdesign.com/support. You can join Chris, Siraquan, Stacy, Radu, Megan, Andrew, John, Mark, and Kevin by supporting the show for as little as $3 a month. And there's some awesome perks like that badass holographic Beyond UX Design sticker. You can get a shot on the show every week. There's even a package to meet with me for 30 minutes every month. Remember to sign up for the newsletter and check out all the past episodes along with all the show notes at beyonduxdesign.com. I hope you keep coming back for more great UX tips from Beyond UX Design. And until next time, remember, you're more than a designer because there's more to UX than design. I'll see you around. Take care, y'all. You know the last thing my grandpa said to me before he kicked the bucket? Hey, kid, watch how far I can kick this bucket. He kicked it so hard.